journey into personalized learning really began about 7 or 8 years ago with Johnston piloting one-to-one iPads. So I was fortunate to be one of the pilot teachers, which meant I got 4 iPads to have in my classroom, which really became kind of a station rotation model. I mean, that's really all you could do. We were using Moodle, and so we had that kind of the course website kind of concept, but you had to go to a computer lab. So getting the iPads in the classroom really allowed for you to do true kind of in-class blended flipped lessons. And so I was really just experimenting. And then we went one-to-one iPads. And so Moodle became an even bigger part of my daily class. And then when we started getting involved with the blended cohort with Heartland, we had, pie in the sky kind of ideas of all these different opportunities. The thing that was consistent throughout that though was I wanted to create an opportunity for each student to have some control over the pace and kind of not exactly always the topic, but some flexibility in the pace of their learning and some choice in what they were learning about related to a larger topic. So as a social studies teacher, when we're studying civil rights, for instance, there's obviously names everyone knows like Dr. King or Rosa Parks, but there are so many people giving students the opportunity to say, I want to study children in the civil rights movement. I want to study American Jews actually played an interesting role, or, Freedom Summer. I want to focus on just that event. So creating those kinds of opportunities, that's kind of been the thing that's been consistent. Can we get flexible pacing and can we get some choice in the student learning? As we got more into the cohort and got kind of more realistic about what Johnston can offer, we started to create the courses that we're offering now, which are blended versions of our mostly general ed courses. We do have an AP computer science blended course, but so I'm teaching blended US history, and now we've changed the schedule and we've given me opportunities to change not just the pace of the learning, but also the time and the place. And so we have, some days, like for instance, today we don't have class. Students are working on a big summative project. I've been a part of that project. I give them online feedback. We use tools like Shobi, and obviously we still use Moodle. But in using those different tools, I'm able to give personalized feedback. Students are allowed to choose flexible topics. We can meet in small groups or individually, or I can just give that feedback online. And so that thing that's been consistent has been that pace and choice, and now we've added that flexibility of timing and the space that they're working in as well. So when we first started taking the courses as a group, it was myself and 2 other teachers with our district instructional technology coordinator. And so the 4 courses of the cohort that we took together with Intro to Online Learning, the Designing Online Lessons, the Assessment, Feedback, and Evaluation, those courses really were kind of the cornerstone. And we've decided that any teacher at Johnston that's going to teach a blended course needs to take those 4 core classes together. That was really the core of really realizing that what we wanted to do wasn't totally radical. It was taking really effective instructional practices and changing the delivery. And so I think the learning experience and going through the cohort and working with teachers from different districts, as well as my own colleagues, was the brainstorming and the introduction to really interesting ideas and people. Working with the Heartland staff obviously was a really beneficial experience, as they both had enough structure. I mean, you were truly using effective blended instruction. We were able to experiment on our own. There was flexibility in our pace. We were able to work. Some of the classes were fully online. We were able to work on our own time and place and pace and all those things, but also it was a really rich learning experience. And I was able to start creating my class through the course. And I think that was one of the most powerful things I took away, was I was walking into my own blended classroom, having built some resources that I was able to implement with my students. I continued to take the courses through Drake for credit to get their online teaching certificate. And I think that was a really good experience. I have looked into some other just kind of credit hour course offerings with, like, Augustana University has some things, and there are other places that are doing things with online learning and pedagogy. But I think really having that starting point with the cohort model, working with those same people, seeing them in the different classes, participating in online discussions, was really a really powerful way to kind of keep the learning moving forward. And now with colleagues who are starting the cohort or in the cohort now, I'm able to connect with them. And so that having that consistent piece of our professional development as a group has really helped to further the discussion. And really, we talked about establishing a culture of what blended learning means at Johnston High School. And so students are having a consistent experience, whether it's a math or a financial literacy or history class. Some of those same pieces of effective pedagogy are still there. And creating that really consistent experience for students, as well as allowing us to collaborate as professionals. Well, if you were to walk into my classroom today, it would be empty because the students are released today. They have a big project due tomorrow, it's an iterative project, something we work on throughout the year, and they turn in kind of different parts of it along the way, focusing on the inquiry standards from the Iowa Core. But so students are doing their work. I can check in on their progress online. And so they have flexibility in when and how and what they're doing, but they don't really opt out of doing it because it really becomes a passion project for most of my students. And so today they're not there and they're working. So on a typical day when we have class, I use a lot of station rotation. I use the beginning of class to kind of bring things together and check in. And I use a lot of online formative assessment. Moodle is kind of our home base, but then we'll use other tools to kind of keep a little bit of variety without overwhelming them with differences. One consistent tool that I use is quizzes in Google Forms. And the reason I use that is because there's a fun add-on called Certify 'em, that when a student gets a certain score, they actually get a PDF certificate. So it's kind of a fun thing for them. Genuinely, they like collecting those, almost kind of like a badge system. But I check in, where I can look at their data before class of who's completed the quiz, who hasn't completed it, who took 5 attempts to get the cut score, the mastery score. I have students use actual clips in class to kind of move themselves. Where are they on the learning pathway across learning targets? They actually move their clip and indicate what objective they're on and what learning target they're on. Not as like a rewards and punishment type clip chart type system. It's really just an indicator of where am I at in my journey. It's okay to be wherever you are as long as you're moving forward. And so start of class, we kind of come together and kind of check in and collectively do a little bit of direct instruction perhaps. But then from there, we have our agenda. And like Caitlin Tucker talks about that horizontal agenda so that there are different things going on in class. I really like working in small groups. I find that to be the most effective way to use class time. So in a 45-minute class period, I try to have maybe 2 or 3 stations. On a block class period, I've had as many as 4. I think anything more than 4 gets to be difficult to manage though. And so then students have some flexibility if they want to work alone, if they want to work in groups. I have headphones available if there's a kind of a flipped instruction piece using Edpuzzle. But otherwise, they're using tools to read or collaborate online, or they're creating something in class. And then I like to use those opportunities, to put posters up on the wall that students created and things like that. So in any given class period, I try to come together to check in as a whole group, communicate maybe anything important coming up. And then I like to have that release within the classroom to give students some of that loose leash so that they can still be in charge of their learning, but with more of that scaffolding and support. Sometimes I'll have students use the classroom and then I'll pull groups out into a hallway or a common area. But I really want that classroom to feel like their workspace. I really want them to take ownership of it. And I try to have those, consistent expectations of any traditional classroom, but I also want them to realize like, this is their space and these are the things we need to get done, but almost more of like a professional setting that when they enter, they're there for a purpose. And I think by giving choice and flexibility and pacing, it allows kids to feel trusted and feel more like a professional. And so that's been a really positive thing. So my class is maybe messy and it maybe is busy. And some days it's kind of loud and especially if kids are, working in small groups. But a lot of days you'd come in and you wouldn't be exactly sure what's going on. And so it's important to kind of talk to the kids and see where they're at. And that gets to be my role as facilitator then, as opposed to the sage on the stage kind of concept. I get to really be in it with them and swimming through it and working with them and troubleshooting and exploring. And that's been the most rewarding thing, I think, as a blended teacher, is kind of going on that journey with each kid in a lot of different ways. At Johnston, juniors and seniors have open campus privileges if they don't have a class on their schedule, or in my case, if class isn't meeting face-to-face. So some of my students are on campus. They might be in a commons area. They might be in library. Sometimes they're meeting with me or working in small groups with me. But if it's 7th and they don't have an 8th period, they can go home, or I have 8th period. And so then a lot of those kids either leave or maybe they go somewhere while they wait for practice or an after-school activity. But it's been very interesting that kids, the way they choose to use that time. And the nice thing with tools like Moodle and the timestamp on a Google Form quiz is I can see when they're logging in, and I can kind of keep track of that. And so you can see if kids are procrastinating and waiting until the last minute before a deadline, or if they're logging in during what would have been the face-to-face class period. And so that allows me to also communicate with students about accountability and to communicate with their parents. So that's been a nice feature as well, of creating that flexible schedule, I've been able to still have some of those accountability pieces to really help them develop those skills, those executive skills. And that's something I do a lot of instruction with, is executive skills. The interaction with parents has been really positive. A lot of positive feedback at parent-teacher conferences, a lot of parent feedback on student work. We try to do, students build a website as part of their semester test in the first semester, and then we adjusted and expanded for the second semester. So students have kind of a public product, and so that's been a really good thing, that parents get to see some of these cumulative pieces. But parent feedback has been really positive. A lot of parents suggest that it reminds them of their college experience, and not in that the rigor of the courses as college or AP or anything like that, but just in that structure of the student learning to manage their time and build some of those skills, as well as the idea of, the students having choice and that idea of passion projects throughout the course of the school year. So parents have been very positive and supportive. It really changes the conversation when you are working with a kid towards a common goal, as opposed to, I gave the kid these 6 assignments and they didn't turn them in. It changes that kind of adversarial structure of the conversation of, I'm trying to get them to do something, to we're trying to do this together. And that's probably, like I said, been the most rewarding thing, is to go on that journey with the kids and kind of be a partner in learning, as opposed to just teacher-student relationships. Kids have been really positive. Interestingly, coincidentally, I had got some feedback from a student today about that they are really an independent learner. There are 2 students who are very strong students. They're strong in whatever they choose to do. They're really motivated. They're really curious, even though one of them will tell you he does not like history. He likes the class because he gets to be in control of his learning. And they want me to release them even more. They're we have to go back for other kids. We have to review, like I was talking about earlier at the start of class. We have to go back and start over, and they want to be even more freedom, more flexibility. I think kids really appreciate being talked to like an adult, being treated and trusted like an adult in learning, while at the same time they realize that there are certain things that are, skill building type activities, scaffolds that are important to have, and accountability pieces like checking their online attendance, seeing the last time they interacted. So the student feedback has been really positive, and our numbers have been pretty consistent with other class sizes, because U.S. history is required, but blended U.S. history is a choice within that requirement. But I've had lots and lots of students ask about the course. I've had students switch from a traditional setting to my course at semester. Not a lot, because we're trying to kind of be consistent with our scheduling, but the word of mouth and that kind of idea has been very, very positive. And curiously, it's not because kids think it's easier. It's because kids want some control and ownership. I have a lot of students who say this is harder but better. And so I don't think that's a put down towards other classes. I think it just speaks to, as a student at Johnston High School, you have an 8-period day. You may have 7 classes that kind of feel the same. If you're not in something like show choir or band or an industrial technology course, it might feel the same all day. And so I think having that change and that kind of flexibility is almost like though it's a different type of challenge, it's kind of a refreshing challenge, I think, for a lot of my students. I think one challenge that I've found in personalized learning is that I am constantly on the move, which is it's not a bad thing. Like I said, this is a really invigorating way to teach, and I couldn't go back. I really love what I'm doing. But one challenge is, with each semester, there's this variety of the learner ideas, the learner's perspectives, maybe some of their needs. This school year, I've definitely had more students who needed more scaffolding than I had last year. So that's kind of been a learning experience of personalizing what was, I thought, kind of a personalized experience, because of the needs have changed. And I think that will always be true. But the one thing I'm really hoping for is trying to find more ways to have an authentic audience for their work. We do a lot of not true PBL, but we do a lot of project-based kind of summative assessments. And so it's kind of an inquiry model, and students kind of create their own question, and they find their resources, and we kind of collaborate through that process. And then as students kind of come up with this finished product, whatever it is, sometimes it's a poster, one student wrote a poem. So, there's all kinds of different things that have come up. But now that next challenge for me is helping those students find an authentic audience outside of teachers or peers or their parents. Working with a student last year who did a project on the role of women in nursing and how the nursing profession has changed. And we tried to connect with, the dean of the College of Nursing at Mercy in Des Moines. And, just something like that, where if we could find a professional or an expert or, someone close or somewhere far, it doesn't matter, creating those kind of opportunities, because I feel like my students invest so much into those projects. I want them to get more than a grade. I want them to get more than my comments and my feedback. And, like I said, I've had students do really amazing things, and it's like, how do I share that? And how do I do a better job? Because I think that would just add to the relevance of their work. They have choice, they have control, and now upping the stakes by saying, how can we get it out there to the world? More than just building a website, although that's been a really rewarding experience. I kind of want to find that next level and find that for as many students as I can. One of my key takeaways from my time as a student in the cohort and my first year, now my second year of blended instruction, is that it is so much more intricate than the traditional classroom. As a teacher at Johnston High School, typically we have 2, maybe 3 different preps. Some people have 4, but you tend to write one lesson plan for that class. Maybe you teach it 2 or 3, maybe 4 times in a day. You get to kind of refine it, troubleshoot something here or there. But as a blended instructor, the only redo I really get to do is on a screencast. Otherwise, when I'm planning for class period, I'm planning for small groups, or I'm planning for multiple needs, and it's going to be different no matter what I do. So I can't really just refine or adjust. And luckily, I don't have to plan for a sub because of the structure of the day that my students just wouldn't have class, because I honestly don't know what I would tell someone. When I do have another teacher come in, it's like, well, these kids are, here's a list of things that will be going on, but you got to ask the kids, what are you supposed to be doing right now? What are you working on? Show me this. Show me your process. And I think that's been something that in my learning as a blended student, I think that the Heartland team did such a great job of creating that common starting point and then giving us a challenge of how would we apply it in our own classroom, create a lesson, create a module, create an assessment, give an example of a rubric. And so you created the framework for us, but then it was all personalized application. And so in trying to do that for my students, you guys do a really good job at Heartland, because that is a tough thing to do. And so, so I'm working with juniors in high school, and I've got wonderful students. But when we're talking about the Cold War or something is kind of our big picture topic. And then within that, I'm going to have kids. I've got kids kind of going in all these different directions and giving them the supports and the planning that they need to be successful in what they're doing in their kind of avenue. We talk, the phrase I use a lot is a learning pathway. I come up with the driving question for the big part of our unit, the common part of our unit. I come up with learning targets within that. And that's kind of the common, the U.S. history curriculum piece. But then the students have pathways of how they approach that learning target. So it might be Khan Academy or Ed Puzzle or our textbook, or it could be, a myriad of other resources. So when a kid does take that different pathway, then you have to kind of go with them. And so it doesn't mean that I'm certainly not doing all the work. It's just that I'm making sure that no kid is totally going it alone. And so planning those kind of supports and then helping those kids make those connections, that's what is really, really rewarding. But it's also, like I said, one of the biggest challenges of being in this kind of personalized learning structure. I have 50 students. I don't plan 50 lesson plans each day, because kids tend to group and kind of chunk and in different ways they stay on kind of the same parts of the path. But it's not planning one lesson plan for my U.S. history students. So it's kind of an interesting middle road, and it's constantly evolving. And like I said, it's invigorating though, because I'm passionate about history, and I'm helping them find a passion related to that. So I've learned a ton from some really amazing projects my kids have done, and that's been a great experience. So for my U.S. history course, the first unit is actually, I call it Becoming a Blended Learner. What I've done is I've combined historical thinking skills and resources like SHEG and the Stanford History Education, and resources that I've kind of compiled over the years with executive skills, learning with like Dawson and Guar, two of the authors that I kind of lean on. They have books like Smart But Scattered, and there's different resources like that. Nancy Sulla is another really good one with executive skills learning. And so what I've done is, in this Becoming a Blended Learner unit, I kind of marry this idea of collaboration, corroboration, contextualization, historical thinking skills of this is how we analyze a document, this is how we look for answers to our questions, with also then reflection, metacognition, time management, task initiation, some of those executive skills. And so in that first unit, I start to introduce some blended tools. We do some whole group learning, and then I start to do a lot of in-class blend or in-class flip, where kids, okay, this is the objective, you got to work your way through it. And then we come back and we reflect, and we do a lot of self-assessing. So I'm very intentional in those first couple weeks about developing those blended learner skills. And like I said, I really marry that to executive skills. That's those structures, that executive skills learning, and there's so many great resources. And then the way I kind of make it relevant to the history content and the skills that they're going to use throughout the course in terms of as history students is I really focus on historical thinking skills. And so they are learning content, or they are using content. They're in primary and secondary sources. They're looking at different online tools that we'll use in the course. But also we have very explicit conversations about like, what were you supposed to get done? How long did it take you? What are your next steps with that? How good do you feel about, what you've learned? If you had a test today or whatever the case may be. And so that by having them self-assess and reflect and plan ahead and then check in on their progress towards that plan, especially in that first unit, the first couple weeks, I kind of build a vocabulary with my students so that when we go through this the rest of the semester, it's not a surprise to them. And they do we call it at Johnston, a blended learner self-assessment. It's a Google form they fill out every few weeks, and it asks them about key components of online learning success, like their regularity with online tools. Are they checking in? Are they participating? Not just their academic success, but how they feel about how they're doing, their confidence. Then there's some free response things that are, what do they need from themselves, or what do they need from the instructor to be successful? And so that is like a part of our language. And then also the Khan Academy growth mindset activities are helpful. And so we use those as well. And it's also a good way to get them introduced to using Khan Academy in class. So we've made executive skills just a part of our vocabulary, and we're constantly applying those and discussing those and coming back to them throughout the semester. And then I also give them feedback on those skills, not as a grade, but as part of like a project rubric. There are components about time management and task initiation. And so I give them feedback throughout the semester. And like I said, we discuss it often. They reflect every few weeks. And that's been awesome. I mean, it's not every kid, of course, but I've had some amazing kids comments like, I've really grown as a learner because of this class. And that's like the ultimate compliment, I think. One thing we've agreed on with any blended course at Johnston is we're going to start out with that, tying those kinds of learning skills to whatever the content is. The gradual release model, and there's some other resources that talk about like the first 20 days. And so we use that phrase like the first 20 days. I mean, what we really mean is a unit, like our introductory unit, and making sure that every student has an opportunity to discuss and kind of build up those skills. And so we are going to probably start to run into where kids have multiple blended classes. And so we'll have to be aware of that, because we won't want to just kind of keep doing the same thing for those students. But I think we're in consensus that those skills are essential for success. And because it's a different delivery format, like they have to be practiced, they have to be taught. And so to give all students that kind of tier 1 exposure, and then being aware that, there will be students who have been through a blended class before, and so we could adjust for those. But I think that that's one of the kind of the core values of blended learning at Johnston is you're teaching more than content. You're teaching learner skills, you're teaching perseverance, you're teaching problem solving. None of our kids are learning how to fix every bug on a website or anything like that, but they are learning that, okay, when I run into a roadblock, what do I do? Who do I contact? What's my next step? Even little things like problem solving, like trying a different browser, just little things like that don't always come naturally to our students. Those have to be explicitly taught. Otherwise, you're just setting the kid on a path to frustration. And once they hit that frustration point, there's not learning happening. So it's really about scaffolding and supporting them on a pathway towards success. And gradual release is our instructional model. But in this case, we're releasing control. Like I said, that's been so rewarding to have kids really take ownership of their learning and come back to me with something that I would never have expected, and teach me lots of different things. And then the conversation with the kid changes, the conversation with the parent changes, and it's one of those things that's high leverage. I mean, that's something, those are skills that are going to transfer way beyond a U.S. history class. I think one of my goals professionally is to continue to connect and share not only resources and strategies, but try to share time with colleagues. And if I can find a way to connect my classroom to other classrooms, I think that would be a really rewarding experience. I think tools like just any kind of collaborative tool, whether it's something like a Google Docs type setup or something like a Zoom Hang or a Google Hangout kind of concept, if I could find ways to continue to move beyond the walls of the school, I think those are going to be really enriching experience for students. Again, I think, learning history content, of course, but also then just some of those learner skills and some of those experiences that they may not get otherwise. So I think one of my professional goals as a blended learning instructor is going to be to continue to find ways to create experiences using technology that aren't otherwise possible. I've worked with a friend in Minnesota who teaches history and government at a high school that would be pretty similar to Johnston High School. And just like, could we just set up like a Google Hangout and just turn our laptops around, face the whole class, have a debate, have a discussion? I mean, that's a completely different audience, and share our learning. And if we could just little things like that, it doesn't have to be earth shattering. It doesn't have to be something from across the globe, but just something outside of the walls of the high school is going to be really creating those opportunities to create powerful learning experiences for my students that will stick with them. And then, like I said in a previous question, if we could find ways to find more authentic audiences, I think that would be a goal for my students. I want to continue to challenge them to try to find authentic audiences, and I want to be a better conduit for them to get their work out into the world. Publishing websites is a really great start to this sort of thing. And like I've told them to, you could put that website address on an application to something. This is a portfolio of my work. But so maybe even finding the next level to that, authentic audience, that would be a goal for my students. I think for me, one of my favorite things to do for inspiration is to get into Twitter and look at lots of different chats. It's like SS chat or ed chat. There's a flip class chat. There's just people around the country who do interesting things. And I've stolen a lot of ideas. People I'll never meet, but just seeing a tweet, following a link, going to their blog. I just think there's so many great things out there. And again, because this really at its core is just effective pedagogy, finding teachers who do things a little differently. So Dave Burgess is an author in the Dave Burgess Publishing. There's so much stuff there. Those have been really powerful for me. So the TLAP and Explore Like a Pirate, like all those kind of hashtags and things, that's my favorite personal thing. In the building, I am an instructional coach for most of my day, but I have a colleague who is a social studies teacher, instructional coach, that I go to him a lot. So just having that coach, he's been through the blended learning cohort. He's a good teacher already. And then he hasn't had his own blended classroom yet, but he's got some of that training. And just, even if he weren't, he's a fresh set of eyes. So having that kind of colleague who can be in it with me. Now we're starting to build out at the high school. We've got currently this semester, I'm one of 3 blended learning teachers. Having them has been great. Connecting with other districts has been really powerful, and doing this type of conversation, video chats in the building. I think because, like I said, because it's effective teaching, inspiration's everywhere, and there's so many good ideas. And so then the challenge becomes, how can I bring that into my classroom? How can I use this piece or that piece, or how can I adapt it or modify it so that it fits our goals? And then I think, some of the authors that have been really helpful. Caitlin Tucker, she's on a team. I can't think of the other authors in some of her books, but that's been really great. Matt Miller and the Ditch That Textbook and Ditch That Homework, like that construct, that's been great. Lots of great podcasts, not just about technology, but about instruction. Shake Up Learning, Casey Bell. Casey Bell is another great author. That's a good one. But the Google Teacher Tribe, the Edu Duct Tape is Jake Miller. That's a really great one. I love podcasts. I could go on about this for a little while. But Matt Miller, Casey Blake, they do the Google Teacher Tribe together. And then Jake Miller is a kind of a new one. Those are really great podcasts. And then Cult of Pedagogy and Jennifer Gonzalez's work. Those kinds of things. Like I get into that. I really love learning. I really get fired up. And you can't do everything. That would be like, if I could go back and talk to myself before I started my first class, I'm sure we got told in the blended learning cohort to be aware of this, but I was so excited that I actually had my kids tell me in like September, October, they're like, there are too many tools. We're doing too many different things. Can we do a few things, can we do more with less? And so that was like, oh yeah. I need to slow down and think about the user experience. So I love it. I love learning. I love blended learning. So I think going to Twitter, listening to those podcasts are really great ways to kind of go outside your school. But having a coach or somebody who can just come in and watch your class, who can look at your Moodle and say, these directions aren't clear, or this has 7 steps and you're going to lose kids at step 3. Just that critical eye of someone you trust. That's been, even if they're not a blended teacher, those have been the 3 things that I would really say have grown me as an educator. And blended or not, I think that those have been 3 really great resources.